Hi there, I'm Matt Donnelly from RotoBaller, and let's talk about those starts and sits at the wide receiver position heading into week number 8. Yeah, that's right, we are heading into week number 8, but before we do, let's talk about some public service announcements that we got to talk about first here, and that is the first one off the bat. I record these videos on Monday, so make sure you are following the injury report because plenty can happen between now and Sunday's kickoffs. The best way to do so is heading over to the RotoBaller Discord channel where our experts are there to help you basically 24/7. Well, at least I'm there all the time, so you can count on me answering all your starting sit questions leading up to kickoff. Second, hey, we are out of that 16 bye week. We're heading into week number 8 where no teams currently have a bye. That means all those waiver wire ads from last week that you needed to grab to fill out your lineup, they can go right back to where you found them. That's right back in the waiver wire trash. Now, heading into week number 7, we knew that we were going to be without Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf, Zay Jones, and Juju Smith-Schuster. And it appears all but Samuel are set to return this week. Now, I mean, if Juju Smith-Schuster is ever actually a rot, you know what? I'm not even going to go there. It's not about him. It's about you. Not to mention that we do have a nice little flex option possibly coming back this week in Tank Dallas. He's set to appear after the Texans come back from their bye week. We do have a couple situations, though, where we need to monitor, and those include Jalen Waddle and Christian Watson, who got a little bit banged up in their games last week. So what wide receivers can you trust this week? Which wide receivers should you be fading? Well, you know what? I got you covered in the must-start, must-sit wide receivers for week number 8. Starting with the man, the myth, the legend, Adam Thielen versus the Houston Texans. Listen, the Houston Texans, they are good as any team when it comes to limiting opposing receivers this season, holding them to under 29 fantasy points per game. But no one has been able to contain Adam Thielen, let alone stop him this season. Coming off a week 7 bye, Thielen sits 7th in the NFL in receptions and 13th in receiving yards with 509. And believe it or not, the old man, he's still getting it done down the field with 6 of his 49 receptions coming 20 yards or further down the field. That's more than Jamar Chase and Devontae Adams. Now, Thielen, he's also been credited with 59 targets this season. And that's not even the crazy part. The crazy part is he's been credited with 0 drops to date. And in fantasy, that's a good thing. Since week number 2, you want more good news? Since week number 2, he is averaging 24.7 fantasy points per game, which happens to lead the entire National Football League. Not Jamar Chase, not Cooper Kupp, not Justin Jefferson. Now, since week 2, he also has 4 touchdowns in 5 contests and has seen at least 8 targets in every single game. Another wide receiver who happens to be another one of my guys is Christian Kirk versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Yes, heading into the 2023 season, he has outperformed many analysts' expectations. I don't even think it's up for debate who the true number 1 wide receiver is in Jacksonville. Kirk leads the Jaguars in targets, yardage, and touchdowns, and only Evan Ingram, not Calvin Ridley, has more receptions. Expect that trend to continue this week against the Steelers team that over the last 4 weeks has allowed 47 receptions, 680 yards, and 4 touchdowns, and the second most fantasy points to wide receivers. Like Adam Thielen, Christian Kirk has found success since week number 2, averaging 16.8 fantasy points per game, and he has 101.1 fantasy points over that period. Kirk has at least 78 yards and or a touchdown in 6 straight contests. Last week against the New Orleans Saints, Kirk once again scored on 1 of his 6 receptions. It also led to 19 fantasy points and over 90 receiving yards. Another wide receiver that I am hyped for this week is Zay Flowers going against the Arizona Cardinals. Flowers, he is rounding into his own, creeping into that wide receiver 2 weekly conversation. Last week against the Detroit Lions, Flowers hauled in 4 of 6 targets for 75 yards. On the season, Flowers has produced 442 receiving yards while averaging 11.4 yards per reception. The touchdowns, they haven't been there yet, but trust me, they're coming. Flowers has just 1 on the season. 6.6% of his fantasy production has come via touchdown, and that is the 3rd lowest total for receivers in the top 40 when it comes to fantasy production, courtesy of Rich Rebar when we're talking about touchdowns. But coming into week number 8, the Arizona Cardinals, they have surrendered 7 scores. Arizona has also allowed opposing wideouts to haul in 103 receptions for 1,357 yards, which added up is the 6th most fantasy production allowed to the position. Even over the last 4 weeks, nothing has changed. The Cardinals have surrendered 854 yards on 65 receptions. over the last 4 weeks. Start Zay Flowers, no questions asked. Now, I do have questions about these players that I am sitting, and that includes DK Metcalf versus the Cleveland Browns this week. Metcalf, he should probably sit this game out as well. Metcalf was a late scratch, we all know that, with that shoulder injury, which opened up an opportunity for Jackson Smith-Njigba. This week, the opportunities that the Seahawks receivers will be getting are going to be far and few between. I watched last week's Browns-Colts game, and I saw what Josh Downs did there. He hauled in 125 yards on just 5 catches. So there is a possibility that the Seahawks receivers could have some kind of production, but likely that's going to go to the second option there in Tyler Lockett. We know that Gardner Minshew is a gunslinger out there, and those YOLO balls, they're up for grabs for just about everyone and anyone, but luckily Downs was able to call those in at 25 yards per reception, while Pittman, he averaged 41.5 yards per reception, except he only caught 2 passes. Now, I'm willing to bet that Cleveland cleans up the big play this week and returns to form. A form that has led to the 3rd fewest receiving yards allowed and the fewest fantasy points surrendered to the wide receiver position. Another wide receiver that I'm fading this week is CeeDee Lamb versus the Los Angeles Rams. This game here features 2 of the best defenses when it comes to defending the wide receiver position in fantasy. They're going head to head, as the Cowboys are allowing the 3rd fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, and the Rams, the 4th fewest. The difference here is Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are going to get theirs, one or the other. Dallas, they're not going to be able to stop both these wide receivers. And on the other side of the field, the Rams face CeeDee Lamb, and what has made this Rams fantasy defense great is their bend but not break attitude. They have allowed some yards this season, but they've only allowed 1 touchdown to a wide receiver to date. Yes, that's big news, because Lamb, on the other side of things, is one of those other receivers who in fantasy has come across some fantasy production while not being able to find the end zone. In fact, Lamb's only receiving touchdown to date came back on October 1st against the New England Patriots. Now, the law of averages here does not bode well for Lamb in this matchup. Another wide receiver you have to fade is DeAndre Hopkins versus the Atlanta Falcons. Hopkins is a Hall of Famer, no doubt about it. He's got all the pedigree that you could possibly want. He's even gone as far as making bad quarterbacks look serviceable throughout his career. Even with all the credentials that DeAndre Hopkins possesses, I don't think it's going to be enough to make a Malik Willis, DeAndre Hopkins thing happen in fantasy. Then again, it's got to be an upgrade over Ryan Tannehill, what he's able to do so far. You know what, though? It's still just fade DeAndre Hopkins. The Falcons are allowing the 6th fewest points to wide receivers this season in fantasy. And Hopkins, in this Titans offense, has now basically been relegated to a wide receiver 3 at best each and every single week. So you should have an allotment of wide receivers this week with no teams on bye that you can easily plug in ahead of DeAndre Hopkins. Hopkins, he has to be a sit. He has 376 yards receiving this season and zero touchdowns to show for it. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine and Josh Wiley are the only passing touchdown recipients this season in Tennessee. What does that tell you? That tells you here are your wide receivers, starts and sits for week number 8. Ooga chugga, ooga ooga. Your fantasy lineups should be hooked on a Thielen this week and every week moving forward. Christian Kirk, start him this week as well. He is averaging 16 fantasy points per game and faces a Steelers team that is allowing the 6th most over the last 4 weeks. Zay Flowers is producing without scoring. Eventually, those touchdowns, they're going to come. It's going to happen this week. Sit DK Metcalf. He sat out last week. He should probably sit out this week. Monitor him, but he's got a difficult matchup against the Browns in week number 8. You're also sitting CeeDee Lamb, who has 1 touchdown this season. The Rams defense, they've also only allowed 1 touchdown this season. Law of averages here, people. And sit DeAndre Hopkins. Even he cannot fix this Titans offense. Over 375 receiving yards, no touchdowns to show for it. You want something to show? Head over to the RotoBaller YouTube channel, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and tune in for all your fantasy football analysis.